Hello everyone, welcome to RPG Retro Reviews. I'm Captain Courageous and I review old school modules and games, reveal fascinating trivia, and do my best to give them a fun and informative analysis. This week I'm going to do a follow-up to my how to run a Sandbox video that I did last year. In that video, I talked about a variety of DMing techniques that one can use in running a Sandbox campaign, but the primary focus of the video was really how to get things started. This video will discuss how to maintain an ongoing Sandbox campaign that literally comes alive, not only for the players, but for you, the DM, as well. In order to do that, I'll be using actual examples from my own campaigns. Also, at the end of this video, I'll have some shots of me at ScrumCon where I played in Zach Howard's In Search of the Brazen Head of Xenopus. Zach Howard is the owner of the awesome old school D&D website dedicated to the Holmes Basic set, Xenopus Archives. Sound like fun? Great, let's get started. If you haven't already checked out my previous Sandbox campaign video, you might want to do that, as the techniques I'll be discussing here are meant to be used in conjunction with those in the previous video. Now, once the campaign has begun and the characters are making plans and interacting with your setting, the narrative techniques that I use from that point forward are very character-driven. It is imperative that you keep good notes about the people the heroes meet on their journeys and the places they go. Any one of these things could become the seeds for an adventure in the future once you go back and flesh things out. The key here is not to overplan on your part. As the campaign takes shape, PCs will gravitate to villains and NPCs that you may not have anticipated. So it is imperative that you remain flexible and allow for this. It is also important that you begin incorporating events into the future narrative and allow the actions of the heroes to shape the campaign's direction. Now, I'm going to be giving some examples of this from my own campaign so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Last year, I began a Tal'Dorei campaign for my players. A few were Critical Role fans, but after reading the campaign guide, published by Green Ronin, there were a couple of ideas I thought were interesting, and it really seemed to me that there would be a lot of fun things to do there, so I agreed. Now, I'm using a published campaign setting, but if you're homebrewing from scratch, that's fine too. Everything I'm showing you here will work in either case. I started the campaign off with the 4th edition D&D module, Keep on the Shadowfell, as a basis for the first adventure. Nothing too complex and basically straightforward so everyone could just get into the setting. The villain in that adventure is a necromancer named Kalarel, or Kalarel the Vile as Matt Koval likes to call him. I made a few key changes to the module to connect the adventure to the setting and flesh it out a little. One of the major changes that I made to the module was in regards to the artifact Kalarel is seeking. In the module, it's mainly just a generic MacGuffin. I thought that was completely uninteresting, and it seemed reasonable that in order to open a rift into the Shadowfell and call forth an army of undead, as that's what Kalarel was doing, if one had the Horn of Orcus, that would be handy. So that's what I did. I changed the artifact from something generic and nondescript to the Horn of Orcus. Furthermore, the setting book states that an avatar of Orcus once came to Exandria with the specific purpose of opening a rift between the dimensions. In the Critical Role web series, seeking out one of the Horns of Orcus was a major storyline in the first campaign. It was ultimately recovered and sealed away safely, but the location of the other horn was unknown, and Matt Mercer has been mum about what happened to the second one. This just seemed to blend well with the Keep on the Shadowfell module so perfectly, and for my CR players at my table, I knew they would be excited about it. As for the other players, they are veterans of D&D, and they know who Orcus is, so ultimately everyone was immediately vested in the story. My players created an interesting group of characters. I had Varys Go-Nodell, a monk of the Cobalt Soul, Rakaira Eclipse, a tiefling sorceress with the Runechild origin, Euphemia Goldworthy, a cleric of the Arcane Domain, Jimothy, a paladin of the Raven Queen, and Fenris Broadtree, a Goliath druid. The module was a big success with my players. They loved it, and the CR fans at my table loved the way I included the Horn of Orcus. During that adventure, I also modified the Goblin NPC Splug, who is really included in the module as a potential ally for the heroes and comic relief. I gave him a jaunty red hat with magical properties. Generally, he could produce rabbits or flowers or such mundane things from the hat, but once a week it could summon an owlbear. Summon it, but not control it. Thus, during the final confrontation, Calorel was backed up against the rift as it threatened to open and spill forth an army of undead. Black, inky tendrils from the rift attacking anyone who got too close. Facing imminent defeat as ghouls and zombies closed in all around them, the desperate party unleashed the poor random owlbear, and the confused thing actually ended up attacking the necromancer, clawing and rending him to bloody bits and pushing him into the rift. The owlbear, the horn, and the necromancer vanishing into the Shadowfell. Now, the expectation might be that this ending gave me a great opportunity to bring Calorel back at a later time with the Horn of Orcus ready for revenge, and the chatter around the table indicate that's exactly what they thought I would do. But no, I decided to subvert their expectations, and literally months later, both in game time and in real time, rumors of a rampaging owlbear with a familiar horn grafted in the middle of its forehead, wreaking havoc in the ivy heart thicket, began to filter to the ears of the player characters. Enthusiastically, they embraced this quest and immediately went off to recover the horn and see what they could do to stop the owlbear's rampage. The reason I'm telling you all of this is for two reasons. First, I wanted to illustrate the organic progression of the campaign that I, as the DM, could not have foreseen. The storyline is an outcropping that is directly taken as a result of the players' actions. Now, of course, they didn't have to go seek out the crazed owlbear, but why wouldn't they? They are invested in the story, the setting, and this directly relates to things that they've done. They are part of the world, and the things they do matter, for good or ill. The second reason I'm using this example is to demonstrate another technique, which is the subversion of expectations. I use that a lot. I like to think about what the players might think I'm going to do. A lot of times, right at the table, they'll say exactly what they think I'm trying to do or what I'm planning. As for my part, I'm always looking for what little twists I can add that will make the story more interesting and give me something else to build off in the future. Though, at the time, I may not know what that is. I can absolutely assure you that when I gave that hat to Splug the little goblin to produce the owlbear, I had no idea it would end up used in the final confrontation and be a key thing in the player's success in that final battle. That final battle was really complex, and a variety of factors and lucky die rolls had to come together to get the result that ultimately happened. So the players are in the city of Amon when they hear the rumors about the crazed owlbear in the Ivy Heart thicket, so they begin making plans to travel there. I also introduce a little complication. Fenris, the druid in the party, made 7th level, and I thus had him summoned to a sacred grove in the Ivy Heart thicket for a very special druidic ceremony or druids meet. There would be a competition, and the winner would be named the Ivy Heart's Protector. Essentially, the Druid Protector would be responsible with returning to the forest any time it was under any kind of major threat. This added an additional character-driven element to the travel there, and additionally was introduced due to several requests that the Druids player had made of me. Here I've blended character background information to drive the campaign narrative forward. As the party made its way overland to the Ivy Heart Thicket using the Silvercut roadway, they encountered vast herds of centaurs. The Druid meet apparently coinciding with the decennial event of Herds Meet, a once-a-decade celebration where the centaurs celebrate their transformation from elves to centaurs by Corellon the Archart, after a battle with Grumsh the Ruiner during the Calamity. Here presented an opportunity to throw in a bit of fun setting lore, a role-playing encounter, and an obstacle that couldn't be overcome by combat. The herds meet, threatening to make Fen late for the competition. The party ended up explaining to one of the centaurs why they were traveling, what their destination was, and why they needed to get to the Ivy Heart Thicket in a hurry. When the centaurs learned that Fen would be competing to be the Ivy Heart Thicket's druidic protector, they allowed the entire party to ride on their backs and were escorted by the herd to the druidic circle where the competition was being held. On the way there, they learned from the centaurs that several large contingents of lizard men, some of them well over 50 in number, had been seen in the Ivy Heart Thicket. This new information creating another conflict that needed investigation. The competition allowed the druidic competitors to select a trusted friend to help them in the dangerous trials ahead. What ended up happening was Euphemia stayed behind to help Fen at his request, and the more sneaky members scouting out the lizard men. At the table, I ran this as a series of cutscenes between the competition and the scouting party. Fen the Druid also gained a rival in the competition, with both winning and losing several key events in the scouting party, learning that the lizardmen contingents were actually working for someone called Maledicta Hexos, and they were indeed seeking the Horn of Orcus. With time now working against them, they had a choice to make: abandon the competition entirely, with Fen giving up his chance to become the Ivy Heart Thicket's protector and go after the horn; to split the party, leaving Fen and the party's cleric Euphemia behind, to go after the lizardmen, or wait till after the competition and seek out the lizardmen then. They chose to wait. Thus, when they finally tracked down the owlbear's lair, they found him already dead within, bearing a horrendous wound in his forehead where the horn of Orcus had been ripped from his skull. So essentially what I tried to do here is to keep things from becoming too linear. There is an entire world going on around the party that has nothing to do with them or their goals. These things can help or hinder them, and it's the introduction of these elements that make the world seem broader, grander, with a deep, rich history. In this case, rather than just track down the owlbear and fight him in his cave, I introduced the Druid meet, which was part of the player character Fen's ongoing storyline. I introduced the centaurs, that initially presented as an obstacle but ended up helping them through their willingness to talk to the centaurs. This gained the heroes some allies, and they learned also about the lizardmen contingent in the Ivy Heart Thicket. I then gave them additional choices about how to handle these various challenges. All the while, other forces are conspiring and working their mechanizations that build conflict with the player characters. The key here is not to overwhelm the players with too many choices or obstacles, and to reward them when they are clever enough to overcome obstacles and turn them to their advantage. The possible obstacles you could throw at players are obviously endless, but I tend to break them down into categories such as time-dependent, character-driven, event-driven, setting-driven, and then not introduce more than 3 of these elements at any one time if I can. Time-dependent obstacles are just that. The most common thing you'll see in the movies and television is the ticking time bomb. The hero must defuse the bomb before it counts down to 0, or boom. In this case, I introduced a competitor for the Horn of Orcus, the lizardmen, and the party had to reach the owlbear before the lizardmen, or the horn would fall into the hands of an unknown enemy. Character-driven obstacles are usually role-playing, not combat encounters. The herds meet of the centaurs and the druids meet were character-driven encounters. Event-driven, adding holidays to your calendar is a tricky thing. I usually don't add them until it's time to introduce them as part of the story arc. In this case, the campaign guide didn't lay down a specific date for herds meet, so I just threw it in at that particular point in time. Setting-driven obstacles are usually those that occur outside the influence of the main quest. It could be something as simple as the weather, or more interestingly, it could be related to some other political event, a holiday, really anything that demonstrates that the campaign setting is a living, breathing, vibrant thing that exists independently from the player's character's actions and desires. This helps reinforce verisimilitude. I'd also like to mention a few other things of importance here. I can assure you that when I introduced the Keep on the Shadowfell, I definitely had in mind to make Calorel the Vile a reoccurring villain, and I'd given absolutely zero thought to the owlbear, which highlights two key points: don't overplan. In all honesty, I like to keep things malleable as possible. If you do make a plan, don't get too attached to it. Be willing to let it form and shape change to reflect the actions of the heroes, and then build off that. This is so much fun that as the DM, even you don't really know where this story is going. You're there for the ride as much as the players are. Such an approach can alleviate DM boredom and add to your enjoyment of your own campaign as it begins to thrive and take on a life of its own, so that you feel like you're actually just chronicling the events rather than driving them. Now, as the campaign has progressed, I have ultimately developed a primary antagonist, or as one might say, the big bad evil guy, or in this case, gal, or really gals. We're getting into spoiler territory for my campaign, as I know several of my players watch my videos, so I'm going to save these tidbits for another video. In that video, I can give you an example of what my expectations were in regards to this, and then talk about what actually happened and how I dealt with my players' reactions to it. The important point I'd like to make is that with a sandbox campaign, it doesn't mean that every week is just complete willy-nilly nonsense. Although I guess you could play that way, but it doesn't seem like that would be ultimately a lot of fun, but each group to its own. It's highly likely that a driving narrative will develop, but that narrative doesn't come entirely from the DM. It evolves organically from the actions of the players, and as one week follows the next over months of play, it increases in complexity. Which brings me to my final suggestion. Each week, after your game session ends, you write at least one page of recap of the session's events. This is what you will read to the players at the beginning of the next session. I always give the recap a chapter name, like something out of an adventure serial that embodies the theme of the previous session. For example, here are the last few recap titles from my own campaign. Chapter 32, Death in Stillben. Chapter 33, Death and More Death. Chapter 34, In Search of Stillben's Lost Son. Chapter 35, The Journey South. And Chapter 36, Muddy Paths and Silk Roads. This serves several functions. Obviously, it will remind everyone where you left off, as sometimes the next session might not happen for weeks. Furthermore, if you make this routine, it will serve to signal that the game session has begun, and now it's time to get down to playing the game. Be sure to include the campaign setting calendar dates to help both you and the players keep track of the passage of time. Finally, as time goes by and your campaign becomes more and more complex, your recaps will serve as a chronicle of what has gone before, and it's something you can give new players joining your campaign to help them catch up. I actually have created a Facebook group, since all my players are on Facebook, and I post the recaps there. This is also handy for when someone misses a session. They can just go to the group at their convenience and see what they missed. For now, that's all the Sandbox advice I have for you. Hopefully you found it interesting, entertaining, and useful. Now, let's talk about ScrumCon. I've been looking forward to this for months, and it totally didn't disappoint. ScrumCon is a small convention held annually in Silver Spring, Maryland. There, I was able to meet and play in a classic Dungeons & Dragons game run by none other than Arch Xenopus himself, Zach Howard. If you've been a subscriber to my channel for any length of time, you might know that I frequently reference Zach's excellent Xenopus Archives website, which is the source on the internet for all things Holmes Basic. A massive resource for old school D&D history and exploring the underworld of Holmes Basic. I've done several videos on the Holmes Basic set, as well as a detailed review of the sample dungeon in that rule set, frequently referred to as the Tower of Xenopus. At the convention, I had the privilege of going through Zach's adventure In Search of the Brazen Head of Xenopus, a direct sequel to that adventure taking place 40 years later. Here are a few picks from that session. A great group of players were there as well, and we all had a blast. Thank you so much, Zach. If you haven't already, check out Zach's website. Zach has also published a 5e conversion for the original Tower of Xenopus adventure, and it's on the DM's Guild, and it's a bestseller right now. A link to Xenopus's archives, as well as Zach's Tower of Xenopus 5e conversion on the DM's Guild, is in the description below. And that's all I have for you this week. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, I'll take a look back at the first edition Dragonlance Adventures book that I've been promising for quite some time, as well as the final part of my City of Brass review and more. Please don't forget to subscribe and click the little bell so you can get notifications when I upload more content. Like, comment, share. Join the RPG Retro Review Facebook group and consider supporting the channel by becoming a Patreon. As always, my friends, may your D20 roll true and game on.